You are still the kind of lawyer who carries breath mints in the inside pocket of your suit because arraignments happen too close to other people's faces, and you still believe, in a tired and practical way, that most days are made of small, fixable problems. You are in courtroom 4B, collar already damp, watching a judge chew through a docket like it's an obligation to finish rather than a set of lives to weigh. The morning is simple. A shoplifting charge that should be a citation, a probation violation that should be a warning, a man who can't read the paperwork he's signing and has learned to hide that fact by nodding at the right moments. Your job is not heroism, it is friction. You put yourself between people and the system and force the gears to grind slower. You bargain for hours so someone's life doesn't fracture over a missed bus. You say, "Your Honor," until the phrase loses meaning. You sign discovery receipts. You stand next to clients who smell like sleeping cars. You do it because you can't do nothing, and because you have built your entire sense of worth on the idea that law, used correctly, is a lever. At 11:16, while you're whispering to a client about whether he can afford to lose his job for a court date next month, your phone vibrates in a pattern that isn't random. 2 quick pulses, a pause, 1 long one. Nobody calls you like that. You excuse yourself, step into the hallway, and answer without looking at the number. The voice that meets you does not introduce itself, does not check if this is a good time, does not perform the politeness that people use when they want something. You're the only attorney on the roster who has tried a homicide and also speaks fluent French. You do not correct the implication that there is a roster. You look down the corridor toward the bailiffs and clerks, toward the normal world that smells like copier toner and old coffee, and you say, "Who is this?" You have 90 minutes to be at Gate C, Private Terminal, Eastfield Airport. Bring your bar card. Bring nothing else. If you call anyone, you will be stopped before you reach the highway. If you don't come, your client in courtroom 4B will go to prison today. You grip the phone hard enough that the edge bites your finger. That client's plea is in 20 minutes. The prosecutor has offered a deal that only works if you're there to argue the terms on the record. The threat is surgical. It is not about you. It is about your function. The voice continues as if reading a list. You will be compensated. You will be protected. You will be required. This is not an offer. You can decide whether you arrive as a volunteer or as a problem. You try to speak and find that you are choosing between words that will invite a response and words that will invite a consequence. What is this about? There is a brief silence that feels like the other end turning toward you, a person setting down a file. A man is about to confess to crimes that will ignite 3 continents if handled publicly. He needs counsel. He has chosen you because your record shows you can keep your mouth shut even when it would make you famous. He is wrong about many things, but not about that. You swallow. I don't represent. You represent whoever you're assigned, the voice says, and in the same breath, your phone screen goes blank. Not a hang-up, the device simply dies in your hand like it has been unplugged from reality. In the courtroom, you can still hear the judge calling the next case. Your client is looking for you through the open door with the expression of someone who has learned that abandonment is a schedule. If you leave, he suffers. If you stay, something else happens. Something that has already been set in motion and is now using you as a component. You return to your client and the prosecutor, and you do the thing you have trained yourself to do. You make time. You lean in, speak low. We're taking the offer, but we need it amended. Credit for time served, no supervised release longer than a year, employment carve-out. You say it fast, like someone with nothing to hide. You do not tell them you have just been conscripted. You do not tell your client that you might not be here next month. You walk him through yes and no answers, and when you stand at counsel table, you perform competence so completely that even you almost believe the day is normal. You get the amendments, you get the plea entered, you get your client out of custody with a date to report, not a sentence today. You do that because you cannot bear for the price of your compliance to be paid by the wrong person. Then you leave the courthouse without looking back. You do not drive home. You do not stop at your office. You go to your car in the employee lot and find a man leaning against your driver's side door, dressed like an accountant who has never had to convince anyone of anything. He holds up your phone, alive again, screen lit with a boarding pass that is not in your name. He does not speak. He simply hands it to you and steps away so you can open your door. On the highway, your hands feel separate from your mind. You keep expecting sirens, expecting to be cut off, expecting the consequence for trying to understand. But traffic behaves, your car behaves, the world stays indifferent in the way it always has, which is its own kind of terror because it means whatever is happening is not a disruption. It is part of an infrastructure you have never seen. At the private terminal, there are no TSA lines, no families, no advertisements. A woman at the desk looks at your bar card like it's a key, not an identification. She gestures you through. Past the glass wall, you see the plane. Small, white, expensive, anonymous. At the bottom of the stairs, two men wait with the calm posture of people who have already decided what will happen no matter what you do. One of them extends a hand. "Counsel," he says. "Not your name, your function again." You climb the stairs. You step into the cabin. The door closes behind you with a soft seal that feels like the end of consent. The man inside is not restrained. He sits at a table, hands folded, the posture of someone prepared to be photographed. He looks older than you expected, silver at the temples, skin too carefully maintained for his age. He looks like the kind of person your city's business magazine would put on a cover to represent leadership. When he meets your eyes, you recognize him not from a billboard, but from a memory of headlines you don't read anymore, because you learned early that the world's cruelty is not lessened by your awareness. He is the minister who survived the coup by moving his family out of the country 2 days before the tanks arrived. He is the man whose name appears in UN reports in paragraphs written like apologies. He is the man whose militias emptied villages so the land could be sold to foreign companies. He is, in plain language, one of the worst men alive. He smiles at you with an intimacy of someone who has studied your life. "Thank you for coming. You do not sit. I didn't agree to represent you." "You will," he says, and nods toward a leather folder on the table. There is a retainer agreement. There are also photographs of your sister leaving her hospital after night shift. There's video of your mother's commute. There's the school your niece will attend next year. You're a public defender, so you believe your life is too small to leverage. That belief is a luxury. Please sit. Your mouth goes dry. The folder is not a threat. It is evidence. You realize with a cold clarity that this man's violence is not impulsive. It's administrative. It is filed. You sit because standing is not resistance. It's theater, and you don't know the audience yet. He opens the folder, turns it toward you. Inside are documents stamped with seals you recognize and seals you don't. A non-prosecution agreement, a memorandum of understanding between entities whose names are redacted, a list of conditions, a list of assets, a list of victims that is not called victims. It is called affected parties, the kind of language used when the truth would break the negotiation. "I am leaving," he says, "and in exchange I will not be publicly tried. I will not be extradited. I will not be killed in a cell by the people who used me and now want to wash their hands. My militia will disarm under supervision. The pipeline will remain intact. The elections will proceed with the opposition I have already discouraged. The investors will return. The refugees will stop coming. The sea will stop receiving bodies that make other governments nervous." You stare at the papers. "And I'm here to do what? Make this legal?" "You are here," he says, as if explaining a simple concept to someone bright but inexperienced, "to turn a catastrophe into paperwork, to give everyone something they can sign, to create a mechanism that does not collapse when the cameras arrive. You are here to protect me." The word lands like a stain. Protect. It is what you thought you were doing in Courtroom 4B, protecting small people from a large machine. Here, it means something else. It means creating a shield for someone who deserves none because the alternative is fire spreading 3 continents. You hear yourself say, Why me? Because you still believe in rules, and because you are poor enough to be frightened and principled enough to be useful. The lawyers I usually hire are obedient. They don't ask the right questions. They don't understand that this only works if the terms are real. I need a lawyer who will argue with me for my own good. You almost laugh, a short sound that has no humor. For your own good. For your survival, he corrects, and for the survival of everyone who will die if I am cornered. You look down at the agreement and see the invisible architecture behind it. Intelligence services, diplomats, banks, all of them needing a way to end something without admitting they began it. The law is here not to do justice, it is here to manage risk. You reach for the retainer agreement and feel in that motion the first moral rupture. If you sign, you become his lawyer. Attorney-client privilege wraps around him like fog. Your obligation becomes zealous representation. Your ability to speak becomes constrained by your duty. You will be silenced by your own profession. If you don't sign, your family becomes collateral, and the man across from you will find another lawyer, a worse one, someone who will make mistakes that will be paid for in bodies. Your pen hesitates. You think about the client you just freed, about how the system only moved because you pushed. You think about how often you have said in training sessions and ethics lectures that everyone deserves representation. You have believed it because the alternative is a world where the powerful decide who gets a voice. But you have never had to apply that belief to a person whose crimes are not allegations, but history. You sign it anyway. The man's smile is small, satisfied, like a lock clicking into place. Good. Now you will help me negotiate terms. Terms with who, you ask? He glances toward the front of the cabin, toward the closed cockpit door. With the people who want me alive, and the people who want me dead, and the people who want me quiet. They are, often, the same people. You will learn their names as needed. Your first meeting happens before you touch the ground. A satellite phone is placed on the table. A voice comes through. American accent. Controlled. Counsel, we have a limited window. If this becomes public before assets are frozen, he disappears. If he disappears, the militia fractures. If the militia fractures, the border collapses. We need a signature in 48 hours. You say, you're asking me to facilitate immunity. We're asking you to facilitate stability, the voice replies. Call it what you need to call it to do your job. Your job. Again, the reduction. You want to spit the phone back at them, but you force yourself into the only power you have, precision. He disarms fully. His command structure is documented, all foreign accounts disclosed, victim compensation fund established, and he submits to a sealed tribunal with jurisdiction to prosecute if he violates terms. There's a pause on the line. That's ambitious. It's necessary, you say. If you want him to stay contained, you build a cage, not a promise. The man across from you watches with interest, as if you are auditioning. The voice says, we'll consider, but his extradition is off the table. You look at your client, this monster, and you understand something that tastes like iron. The law can be used to trap as well as to free. If you can't get justice, you can at least get leverage. Then we need a waiver, you say. He waives sovereign immunity for civil claims in a specific forum. He consents to asset seizure if named triggers occur. We define the triggers, we define enforcement. No more handshakes. The man's eyes narrow slightly. Not anger, calculation. He likes this more than you want him to. When the call ends, he leans forward. You are not like my other lawyers. You do not answer, because anything you say will become part of the relationship you are building, and you already resent how quickly it is forming. By the time you land, you have been given a new phone, a new email, a new contact list that includes no full names. You are driven to a building that is not marked, past guards who do not ask for your identification because they already have it. In a conference room, you meet people in suits who do not introduce themselves with titles, but with functions: state, treasury, agency. On the wall is a map with colored pins, and you realize with a sick jolt that your client's violence has been tracked like weather. They talk in terms of spillover, regional actors, secondary effects. They say humanitarian the way people say logistics. They do not say murder. They do not say rape. They say atrocity allegations and reputational exposure. You want to scream at them that the words are not the thing, but you also understand that this is how people keep moving in rooms like this, by sanding down the edges of reality until it can be handled without cutting anyone important. When you insist on a compensation fund and a list of affected communities, one of them looks at you like you are an inconvenient conscience. Counsel, that's not the mandate. You lean in and let your voice become the tool it has always been. Then change the mandate, you say, because if you don't build restitution into the structure, you are not buying peace. You are renting it, and the interest will be paid in blood later. They do not like you, which is an advantage. People who like you expect favors. People who dislike you expect conflict, and conflict is predictable. The agreement is drafted and redrafted. Your client wants clauses that preserve his dignity, words that let him claim he is stepping down voluntarily. You refuse. You don't get dignity, you tell him, in a private meeting, and the room goes so still that you realize you have miscalculated the boundaries. His guards shift, hands moving a fraction toward where weapons might be. He studies you, not offended, but intrigued, as if deciding whether your spine is useful or dangerous. He says softly, "You forget that I can have you killed." You feel your heart beating your throat. You do not pretend you're unafraid. Fear is information. You use it. I remember. And you forget that if I die, the agreement dies. And if the agreement dies, you will be hunted by people who do not care about courts. He blinks once. Then he nods, like someone conceding a point in a debate. Very well, he says. No dignity. That is the first time you win. The second win is uglier. Treasury refuses to allow the compensation fund to be funded with the assets that would implicate their own banks. They want a token amount, a gesture. You tell them you will walk. You mean it in the moment, then realize walking is not an exit. It is a suicide note. But you have learned in smaller courtrooms that sometimes you bluff with your whole life because it's the only chip you have. They call your bluff by letting you sit alone for 2 hours without updates, a slow pressure meant to make you panic. You use the time to draft the memo outlining exactly how the fund can be structured through intermediaries, how it can be framed as a humanitarian stabilization initiative, how it can be insulated from admissions of liability. You hand it over when they return, not as a plea, but as a solution. The man from Treasury reads it and his jaw tightens, not because you are wrong, but because you have made it possible for him to do the right thing without losing his career. Fine, we'll do it your way. You walk out of that meeting and realize you have become what you feared, someone who understands how to build a moral outcome out of immoral materials. You are proud of it and disgusted by your pride, and the two feelings braid together until you can't tell them apart. When the agreement is signed, the public story is sanitized, a transition, a peace accord. Cameras capture handshakes. Your client appears on television looking like a man who has sacrificed for his country. People cheer because the gunfire stops, because the roads reopen, because hope is easier to sell than truth. You watch from a secure room and think of the victims whose names are not said, whose compensation will arrive as checks labeled aid. Your payment arrives the same day, a transfer to an account you did not know existed, enough to erase your student loans and buy your mother a house, and still have more left than you have ever imagined holding. With it comes a letter, not on letterhead, that simply says, "Welcome to the office." You learn what the office is through repetition, not orientation. You are not given a badge. You are given problems. A billionaire indicted for trafficking, whose arrest would crash an economy and trigger a collapse that would empower worse men. A general whose loyalty is the only thing holding a fragile ceasefire, who has committed atrocities and also controls the only disciplined force preventing genocide. A tech founder who has been selling surveillance tools to dictators, whose testimony could expose intelligence partnerships that would destabilize alliances. Each file is a moral trap disguised as a legal case. At first you tell yourself you are there to mitigate. You are not exonerating them, you are containing them. You are negotiating surrender, extracting concessions, building fences. You are making sure the worst men cannot burn the world down on their way out. Then you notice how quickly mitigation becomes protection, how easily containment becomes comfort. You start speaking their language because it's the only way to move them. You start saying "my client" with a steadiness that frightens you. You start choosing which truths to emphasize and which to bury, not because of loyalty to them, but because of loyalty to outcomes. You start building deals that keep them alive, because dead men become martyrs, and martyrs become movements. Years pass like that, a constant series of rooms, calls, encrypted documents, signatures that stop wars quietly. You develop strategies the way soldiers develop drills. You never meet alone, you control environments, you insist on written terms even when power prefers ambiguity. You treat every promise as a liability unless there is enforcement. You learn to speak to prosecutors about public interest, and to your clients about survival, and to yourself about harm reduction. You also learn the price. The office does not let you leave cleanly. You cannot tell your old colleagues what you do. You cannot take normal cases without risking conflict. Your phone is always a vector. Your family safety is always a line item. When you travel, you are met at gates by men who do not smile because they already have it. When you travel, you are met at gates by men who do not smile because they already have it. Begin to measure time in threats rather than holidays. You learn to read tone on calls the way you used to read judges' faces. The worst moment comes not with a gun, but with a document. A client, one of the worst you have ever had, a man whose public persona is philanthropy and whose private history is a broken children, slides a sealed envelope across a table. He is not a warlord, he is not a general. He is something more familiar and therefore more poisonous, a man who has always been protected by institutions. The evidence against him is overwhelming. The victims are real and alive and finally speaking. The public wants blood. Prosecutors want headlines. The office wants it quiet, because the man's foundation funds vaccination campaigns that keep millions alive, because his company controls supply chains that governments depend on, because his collapse would pull down systems built too closely around him. You open the envelope and find photographs of yourself leaving a hotel with someone who is not your spouse. You feel your throat close, not because you are ashamed, though you are, but because you understand what is happening. This client is not threatening you with violence. He is offering you a mirror. He is saying, you are not pure either. He is saying, you will protect me because you have already compromised yourself, and compromised people are easier to manage. He watches you absorb it. We're both misunderstood, he says. You want to strike him. You want to strike him. Instead, you do the thing you have taught yourself to do in rooms with monsters. You control your face. You choose your words. We are not the same, you say. The sentence is thin, but it is what you have. He smiles, unbothered. Then act like it, he says. Save the children. Save the supply chains. Save the world. Save me. You walk out of that meeting and sit in your car and realize you have been using the word world like an excuse. You have been telling yourself that outcomes justify methods. Now the method is being used to justify him, and you cannot find a clean line anymore. That night, you do not sleep. You write. You draft a defense strategy that does not rely on smearing victims, but on narrowing charges, on moving jurisdiction, on pushing for sealed proceedings in exchange for restitution. You propose a settlement that includes a public admission structured to minimize contagion, words that acknowledge harm without detailing it. You hate yourself for how good you are at it. You hate yourself more for the fact that if you do it badly, he will hire someone worse who will destroy the victims in cross-examination and still win. In the morning, you meet with the office. They want you to bury it. They want arbitration. They want non-disclosure agreements so strict that truth becomes contraband. You tell them no. You tell them the fund must be real, the admission must be real, the monitoring must be real, or you walk. The room goes quiet. The kind of quiet that signals not contemplation, but escalation. Someone says your name for the first time in months, slow, like a warning. Don't be emotional. You hear yourself respond, calm as if reading from a statue. I'm not emotional, I'm strategic. If we make this disappear, it comes back as a movement. If we structure accountability, it comes back as a precedent. They argue, they've threatened, They remind you of obligations, of clearances, of what happens to people who become liabilities. You have learned enough by now to understand that what happens does not always mean death. Sometimes it means erasure, licenses revoked, reputations dismantled, friends turned away by rumors planted like seeds. You are not invincible. You are simply, at this moment, useful. So you make yourself more useful. You lay out the plan like a chess sequence. If they do X, prosecutors do Y. The public does Z. If they give a little, they can keep control of the narrative. If they insist on silence, silence breaks under pressure and becomes scandal. And scandal is chaos. And chaos is what the office exists to prevent. You are not pleading for morality, you are selling stability, because you have learned that stability is the currency they recognize. They agree, not because you have convinced them that it's right, but because you have convinced them that it's safer. You win again, and this win feels like swallowing glass. Weeks later, in a courtroom full of cameras, your client stands and speaks the admission you have negotiated. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is something. And something is sometimes the only unit you can move in a world built to protect men like him. The victims receive money that cannot restore what was taken. The foundation continues its work. The supply chains remain intact. The world does not burn. Outside, protesters scream that you are a monster too. They are not right to feel it. You walk to your car through a corridor of noise and think about how your job has shifted from defending individuals to defending systems, and how systems are often just collections of excuses with budgets. That night, your spouse asks you where you've been. You look at the person you love and realize you have become fluent in omission. You say something that is technically true. Work, you say. You watch their eyes search your face for the rest of the truth and not find it, because you have trained yourself, for survival, to be unreadable. You tell yourself you will quit. You tell yourself you will build an exit plan, that you will find a way to turn your usefulness into a clean break. You even meet with an attorney, one of the few who handles classified employment separations, and he listens to you in silence and then says gently, "You don't understand. You're not an employee. You're an instrument." The word should offend you. Instead, it clarifies. Instruments are not asked what they want. They are played until they break. In the years after, you stop pretending you can be clean. You stop pretending you can be forgiven. You focus on what you can do. You can negotiate terms that limit harm. You can build cages that hold monsters. You can force admissions into records that would otherwise be blank. You can extract money, disarm militias, prevent retaliations, stop assassinations that would trigger wars. You can, in small and ugly ways, reduce the body count. But you also notice what the job does to your mind. You begin to see everyone as leverage. You begin to scan conversations for pressure points. You begin to think in contingencies even when buying groceries. You keep a go bag not because you are paranoid, but because you are experienced. You learn that the worst men do not always threaten you directly. Sometimes they offer you friendship. Sometimes they invite you to dinners where they talk about family and art and pretend they haven't shattered lives. Sometimes they look you in the eye and say, sincerely, "You saved me." And you feel your skin crawl because you did, and because the saving did not make them good. You tell yourself that the law is neutral, that it is a tool, that you are simply applying it. But neutrality is a myth you can no longer afford. Every choice you make tilts the world. Every clause you draft gives someone power. Every silence you keep becomes a shelter. You are not neutral. You are a participant. One evening, long after you have stopped counting cases as separate and started counting them as a single ongoing war fighting conference rooms, your phone buzzes with the familiar pattern. 2 quick pulses, a pause, 1 long one. Your stomach tightens before you even look. The message is short. New file, high priority, client requests you by name. You stare at it and feel the old hook of fear and purpose set you into you. You think briefly of ignoring it, of turning off the phone, of walking away from the instrument you have become. You picture what happens if you do. Someone else steps in, someone less stubborn, someone more obedient, someone who will protect without containment. The world will not know your refusal. It will only know the consequences. You type back one word, available. As you put the phone down, you catch your reflection in the dark screen. You look older than you should. Your eyes have the flatness of someone who has watched too many moral compromises become routine. You tell yourself, not as comfort, but as instruction, that you will do what you always do. You will enter the room, you will assess the power, you will draft the cage. You will protect the world from the worst men by protecting the worst men from the world, and you will keep trying to make those two things mean something other than surrender. You stand, already rehearsing questions, already building contingencies, already feeling the familiar weight settle on your shoulders. The work does not end with closure. It ends, maybe, with you. And even then, you suspect, the office will simply find another instrument, another lawyer, who still believes in rules enough to be used.